Every other thing is for God. If he wants to do it, he will do it. If he doesn't want, it's not my headache. I'm not going to sit down and start consulting who I shouldn't consult. In fact, somebody said at one point that they want to kill goats to do something. I said, don't do that for me, please. That has been my disposition for years until 2023 when we had our first child. So, in last year, my wife she conceived again, and we're expecting twins. So, by August, she started having a condition that wanted us to go back to the hospital. And the doctor said they were likely to terminate the pregnancy because it was too early. I think then it was about 14 weeks or something like that. So he was saying they would terminate it. So that evening, what I did was that I sat with my wife and I said, these children have names already. So that we need to start praying for them and calling their names. And that was what they were named in August last year. They were about 14 weeks then. So they were named, and then we started praying. And one thing I always did, which is the thing that is most exciting coming here, is the quality of praise here. And our leader here, I will attest to the way he dances. It's intoxicating. So that is one of the main things that attracts me to this place. I like to worship, sing praises, and every evening we did that to sing praises, play music, maybe for 10 to like 12 a.m. sometimes. Kept doing that. Eventually, in December, we ended up in the hospital again. The doctor was saying, oh, maybe we delivered them earlier. But somehow, they held up till January when they were to be delivered. Mind you, all through this process, we kept going to the hospital. My wife was perfectly okay. But sometime before their delivery, I had a dream. And the dream was a bad dream. But when I woke up, I'm like, I don't even need to pray. That devil is just lying. I said I was not going to pray. That if I don't pray, it would be a sign that I'm scared of the devil. So I woke up, went about my normal business. I didn't even pray. And then she delivered. Now, before she delivered, her blood level was adequate. The doctor said she didn't need extra. So they didn't even make, although they had reserve, but they said we may not need. Of course, it was serious. But immediately after she delivered, she started losing blood. She was not bleeding. Doctors thought she was bleeding, but she was losing blood like mad. They kept transfusing her. Some days they would transfuse her 4 times. So it took her, a day after she delivered, actually, she went for a surgery. And I wanted to go in with them. They said, no, that I can't go in. So I sat outside, nurse outside the theater. I was praying. Prayed. She came out. She wasn't looking better. Before you know, they said they were going for under surgery. And I said, no, she doesn't look like. At that point, I remember the dream I had. And then I now reminded the devil that I was only lying. And so I started praying again, singing praises. And then when they said she was going to have the 3rd surgery, I said no, that I felt she would not survive. Because after delivering twins, you had one surgery, they want to do another one. I was looking at her, she was looking frail. And then, when somebody is now having doubts, you can see it. So I said, no, I didn't want to under surgery. So I started talking to all the doctors. There were about 5 doctors. So I started talking to them. Eventually, one took her to his office, did one other scan that they all had not done. And they said, this woman is not bleeding. And there is no need for additional surgery. And then what they found out was that her blood, she had a condition that was destroying her blood. So it's not like she was bleeding, she was destroying her own blood. And then I just told her that the same way this thing started suddenly to end. And the very next day, she delivered on Friday, on Saturday, Sunday she had the first surgery. Tuesday she was supposed to have the second one. Before I said, no, let's talk to all the doctors. By Thursday, her blood count just went from 16 to 29 by Thursday. Just miracle. So some of the medication they said they were going to get from abroad to help her, that it would take 2 weeks before those medications came. Before they came, her blood count had even gone back to 39. So I really thank God, and I feel like sharing this with us. This is the power of praise, the power of trust and faith in God. It's a boy and a girl. Okay, so this year has started very well. Okay, so this evening I'm supposed to speak on pressing towards the mark. Let me read first. Philippians chapter 3, verse 14 says, I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. And this passage is one of the vivid illustrations I had as a child. You know, we had this book, Bible story book, where you had this guy who was running and pressing a tape, you know, and you had this Philippians chapter 3 underneath it. I know any athletes who have this written on their boots. Every day, every game they play is written there, you know. And so it's a very powerful passage. And it speaks of one thing, which is focus. Focus. Sometimes we lose sight of our final goal. Everything we are doing here, at the end of the day, we are all striving to make heaven. And it's important for us, this is a very important reminder. When I saw this, I had to go back and read it. And I saw several areas of my life where I know I've lost focus, so to speak. You know, sometimes when you have trials are meant to draw us closer to God. Because you agree with me, like the situation I just narrated, it drew me closer to God in a special way. In a way where I had this praise we're having consistently on a daily basis. Prayers we have consistently on a daily basis. However, the tendency is that once this phase passes, we tend to relapse back to our old ways. So this is a special encouragement for us not to lose focus, to keep our eyes glued on the prize. Because finally, this is our ultimate goal, heaven. And several things that we need to accomplish this goal is, I already talked about focus, which is extremely important. The other one is consistency. It's consistency and having a forward-looking mindset. You know, if you look behind you, there's a likelihood that you may be discouraged. You see your own weakness. And this is one of the lies the devil tells us. You are not worthy. It reminds you of the times you have failed, the things you've done wrongly, you know. And somehow, this focus and intensity also aligns a bit with what happens when it comes to investment, the capital market. And I will speak a lot about this. When it comes to investing, when people come to me, the first question I ask them is, why are you trying to invest? What is the purpose? Because if you don't understand the purpose for what you want to do, then the probability of success will be very low. It's going to be difficult for me to work with somebody who says, oh, I have 20 million I want to invest. Help me invest it. If I don't understand why you're even trying to make this investment, there's a high chance that what the investment I make may in the long run may not be in line with what your needs are. So it's always important for us as we go through life to understand what our most important goal is. Our ultimate goal is heaven. In between, we have several of these other goals, one of which is having financial independence, having financial freedom. And so, early this year, when we were coming to 2026, we had several expectations. You remember Nigeria just transitioned from the Buhari's administration in 2023 to Tinubu in 2024, and it came with a lot of reforms, economic reforms, that we're starting to see the positive signs. Exchange rate has stabilized. Oil production has improved from, at some point it went below 1 million barrels per day. It had improved back to about 1.2 million barrels per day. We also had a CBN governor that was now focused on his core responsibility, which is setting the right macroeconomic environment for businesses to flourish. And as that happened, we saw excitement. The stock markets in 2023 and 2024 did almost 80% put together. And so if you are sitting in this room, I'm sure you've heard maybe your child, your neighbors talk about the stock market again. Because after the crash of 2008, many people didn't want to hear about the stock market again. But a lot of young people today who are not even aware of what transpired then are now talking about investing in the stock market again. There's a lot of excitement in the country. But somehow, along the line this year, some of those expectations have not panned out as we had them at the beginning of the year. And one of the major reasons is the fact that Israel and the United States went ahead and attacked Ukraine. Sorry, it was Russia that attacked Ukraine. So Israel and the US attacked Ukraine. And this have very serious consequences for global economy. So besides all the expectations we have, there are things we need to be aware of where we are today and the impact it has or it will have on us, our investments, and our financial well-being. Because again, as we press towards the mark, as we look out to heaven, one of the things that can make you lose focus is having your finances in a mess. It can really, really make you lose focus. I heard one guy I follow seriously. He was saying that that money is not the root of all evil. That lack of money is, in some regard, is the root of evil. Because you understand that when people don't have money, there are certain things they can condescend to. That if you had food, shelter, clothing, proper health care, you may choose not to condescend to those things. I'm not saying that if you have money, you not condescend. But the fact that many Nigerians, somebody was telling me the other day that things are so hard that he doesn't even see why people should not be corrupt. Somebody was saying this to me. So, if we all have our basics, food, clothing, shelter, proper health care, proper education, there are certain things that you can afford not to condescend to. So it's also important for us to understand what is going on economically, globally, so that we can factor that into our financial plans. So one of the impacts of the ongoing Gulf War is that inflation has gone up again globally. In Nigeria, inflation came down to 15.05 as of last month, February. However, you notice that the CBN's benchmark rate was only reduced by 0.5% or thereabouts. Benchmark rate is still at 26.5%. And there's a reason why there's a wide gap between what the central bank's interest rate is and what inflation is. There's a reason why, because the expectation is that if inflation is down to 16, CBN's interest rate should not be. If inflation is down to 15, CBN should not keep rates that high at 20 something percent. It doesn't make any sense. It means inflation should come down to 16, 17% level. But there's a reason why CBN is unable to lower it. One of the reasons is because as a country, Nigeria is hotbed for what we call hot money flows. Hot money flows is the money that comes into the country from foreign investors. They call it hot money. Especially if that money is not coming in to invest in real businesses. Money is coming in to buy treasury bills, to buy bonds, to buy stocks. If there is a resemblance of fear, that money will go back immediately. But you agree with me that if the money is invested in an actual business, let's say farming or in production, that money can't go back when it's called. Because now the production process has to complete before, how are you going to even get the money out? Are you going to start selling up the machineries? So because interest rate was high, we had a lot of money coming into the country last year. In fact, in 2023, capital importation was at 12 billion. But in 2024, it was at 23 billion. So you can imagine about 95% increase in capital importation. However, 85% of these monies went into banks, treasury bills. CBN has this open market operation they conduct every now and then. That was where most of these monies went into. And now, because there is fear, in some quarters, people are saying there might be a third world war. You know how investors are. They say investors are cowards. Once there is risk, they run. So because of that, most foreign portfolio investors are moving out money back to the United States, to the economies that they consider safe. So, as a result, CBN is seeing these flows, and they don't want to lower rates, because if they lower rates, it will even discourage those investors they know. So they need to keep the rates as high as possible to keep attracting these foreign investors. And so for many of us, having rates at this high level is it could be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on which end of the stick you are holding. If you're a businessman who is trying to borrow money to finance your business or expand, it's bad news. If you are somebody who is just the average Nigerian who just wants to go to the market and buy goods and services, it's also bad, because the person who is producing this water is taking money at a higher cost, and so we factor that cost into the final price of this water. So it all goes to tell us that price levels will remain relatively higher. Price levels will remain relatively higher. So if you have funds that you are keeping or keeping for a purpose, or maybe it's even your retirement funds that you are keeping or managing, you have to be attentive at this point to ensure that you are maximizing the returns. Thankfully, rates have stayed, discount rate for treasury bills has stayed around 16% recently, and that's an effective return of about 18 point something percent. So if you are an investor who just wants to maximize your cash flow, then it may be a good thing, because now, before 2 months ago, we saw Central Bank and Debt Management Office trying to compress rates. In fact, the rates went below 16%, 15%, heading towards 14% before the attack on Iran happened. and then now they've sent it back up to 16%. So if you are someone who is managing money, is I would say it's a good thing. You now have a responsibility because you can make 18% from your investment and then go spend it on higher cost of goods and services. So if you are managing money, if you are leaving your money idle in the bank, you'll be worse off because 1 million today is not the same as 1 million next month. Price levels will keep going up. So on one hand, we need to pay attention and ensure that, of course, many of us here cannot invest in or should not be investing in risky assets. By risky assets, I'm talking about the stock market, and some other private equity fund, private credit. Many of us here should not be investing in those type of things. But Treasury bill offers about 18%, which offers a very good window. Default risk is low because you are lending to the federal government basically, and they never default. Worst case scenario, they print money and pay you off. And then the next thing I want to talk about is exchange rates. You know, this used to be an issue. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is exchange rate, which was an issue prior to 2023. You remember at some point we're heading towards 2000 under initiative. But thankfully, the new central bank came and tightened things up. We saw it go back to come down to 1,400. In fact, at some point this year, we're already talking about 1,000 again before the war broke out. Now, and this is where you appreciate the impact of hot money flows. Once those money started going back, because those foreign portfolio investments was a good source for CBN getting FX to defend Naira. Now, as the reverse is the case, it's putting pressure on Naira again. So it means CBN now has to hit our foreign reserves to be able to defend Naira. So if this is a prolonged war, it's likely to impact exchange rates. So as this progresses, we also need to keep our eyes on exchange rate, especially for those who have exposure to exchange rates, whether it's for school fees or paying medical bills. At some point, people were already selling their dollar investments because the fear was that this is getting to 1,000. So at this point, you have to keep an eye on exchange rate to see how it goes for the rest of the year. And again, we are seeing that the dollar has strengthened because even though they are the instigators of this war, they are also one of the biggest beneficiaries because they have nuclear weapons. They can sit in their country and do all of this, and no one is attacking businesses in their country. So in a way, they are one of the safe havens where people can move money to for safety in case this war continues to escalate. And so I talked about a couple of things, but at the end of the day, if we are talking about keeping our eyes on the goal, I started by talking about knowing what the objectives are. Some of these things, as far as I'm concerned, personally, the portfolios we manage, either for myself or for my company, has not changed much in spite of all of this because at the beginning we were clear about what our objectives were. And so the way we structure our portfolios, we structure them for the long term, such that even if there are changes today, just as we are talking about risk, some months back we were talking about excitement because everyone was saying, oh, invest in shares, invest in shares. You see people abandon their long-term objectives because something is exciting them. You hear that the stock market is doing 40%, but you are retired and your investment advisor told you don't go there, just do bonds and treasury bills because you are not young. You can't deal with the risk. You say, but this thing they are telling me every day that the market is somebody says he bought a car from the stock market, somebody paid off his mortgage from the stock market. This year, I can't even say the number of calls I've received for people who want to open new brokerage accounts on their own. Before you call them, but now people call you from all over the world. You can imagine UK, Nigerians who are in UK, Canada, just everywhere. Why? Because when they go on social media, the only thing people talk about is how you make money from the stock market. I'm not saying it's bad, but you have to understand what your goals are and stick to it, regardless of what is happening. And by the way, during times like this, when there's uncertainty, volatility, fear, is when people actually build wealth. Yeah. Some people actually build wealth. Because if you look at the stock market today, I was discussing with a client, very young person, and I was telling them, he said, the price Google has lost almost 25% from last year. And he was saying, no, he doesn't think it's a good idea. I said, this is where you should go and buy a lot more of Google. This is because why is it down? Is it that people have stopped using Google Mail, Gmail? No. Is it that their number of subscribers has reduced? No. Just fear. The framework of the business is still there. You'll be surprised that even in Iran, people still use Gmail. So during times like this is when people actually make smart investment decisions. But whatever decision you are making must be made in the context of what your long-term goals are. So if you don't understand what the primary goal, the primary reason why you are trying to invest, if you don't understand it, then you'll be distracted by what is going on at the moment, whether it's a war or whether it's the excitement that you see on social media. And I really feel for a lot of young people today because during our time, we didn't have this much of information on social media. It was mostly word of mouth. Oh, this company is doing well here. But now, you open your phone, WhatsApp, somebody is updating status. You go to Facebook, the information is there. You go to Twitter, X, Instagram. It's just an overload. So maintaining that focus is even far more difficult today than ever. And that is why if I can't pinpoint what the investment goal for a client is, I don't sign up to that client because it's dangerous. It's those type of clients that are not clear what they are trying to achieve. When things go bad, they will blame you. But if it goes well, they take the credit that I did this. But if it goes bad, they will blame you. You are the one who advised me to do this. So even as we reflect on this passage, it's a two-way thing. Our final goal is heaven. We must not lose track of it. However, what we are talking about is a temporary goal which serves us while we are here. And even for that, we also need to be clear, understand what the end goal is, and every now and then make sure that all we do is in line with that goal. And never lose focus, and also consistency. If I think the chapter 1 of this of Philippians chapter 3 verses 1. Let me read it. It says, finally, my brethren, rejoice in the Lord. For me to write the same thing to you is not tedious, but for you it is safe. So sometimes we need to hear it over and over and over again. It may sound like we are repeating the same thing, and this is where consistency comes in. There is power in being consistent. It's also one of the things I preach to people, that, especially young people, the way to becoming a billionaire, if that is what your goal is, it's not by hitting one contract and making 500 million. That's not what makes you a billionaire at all. And I've seen this in practical and concrete terms. You see people who work in, and this is something I can share here. You see people who have very good career, they work at whether NNPC, LNG, you know what their salary was when they were working. 3 years after retirement, you can't believe it's the same person. They are selling houses, selling cars just to maintain their lifestyle. So it's not about how much you make, but the habits you built while you were working. And habits are built by being consistent. You compare that person to someone who never earned more than 700,000 throughout his career, but every month was religiously investing 200,000 to 300,000. You wouldn't believe what the person would have made. I was sharing with some people that because then we're comparing between investing in Nigerian stocks against foreign stocks. And I was telling them that we review investment performance before making decisions. And I was showing that if you invested 600,000 in Apple 20 years ago, which was 2006, today that 600,000 would be worth 900 million. So the reason I brought this up is that some people think, oh, I don't have 50 million, so I will not start. But you don't even realize that the 1 million you have today, if you put it in the right investment, can change your life dramatically in the long run. So it's not about the size of your investment, it's what you have been doing consistently. So if the person is consistent and religious with putting down 50,000 in the right investment, it will change the person's life dramatically. So I encourage us to, as I'm doing myself also, to continue to reflect on this passage, which is about never losing focus of our end goal, which is heaven. And even for the temporary goals that we have on earth, to also understand what the final destination is, and also not to be distracted by the noise, we call them noise, that comes along the way. Thank you very much.
We're giving a round of applause. Well, I think I'll go